Landslides and monsoon flooding have killed over 100 people in western India. Typhoon In-Fa has swept into eastern China after flooding chaos. And a bus accident in Croatia kills 10 people and injured at least 45 others. Hello and welcome to teleSUR. I'm José Daniel López in Quito, Ecuador, and this is from the south. The 21st Summit of Foreign Ministers of the Community of Latin America and Caribbean States, CELAC, has been held in Mexico. The CELAC Assembly takes place in commemoration of the birth anniversary of the liberator Simón Bolívar. During the meeting, topics such as integration, economic reactivation amid the COVID-19 pandemic, climate change, among other important issues for the region, had been discussed. Additionally, Mexico is taking advantage of the summit to promote the project for the creation of the Latin American and Caribbean Space Agency for technological development in the region. Mexico's Foreign Minister Marcelo Ebrard met with several foreign ministers during the CELAC meeting. He met with Cuban Foreign Minister Pedro Rodriguez, and both discussed important issues regarding their bilateral relationship and the COVID-19 pandemic. They also assured their commitment to cooperate and strengthen the bilateral relations between both nations. The Mexican Foreign Minister ratified his country's solidarity with the government of Cuba in the face of the recent attacks by the United States. During this summit, the Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has talked about Cuba to highlight its resistance to the permanent siege from the United States.
I believe that for their struggles in defense of the sovereignty of their country, the people of Cuba deserve an award for their dignity, and that island should be considered as the new Numancia for its example of resistance. And I think that for that very reason it should be declared a World Heritage Site.
López Obrador also stressed the need to create a new organization with autonomy from the United States.
It should not be ruled out the replacement of the OAS by a truly autonomous organization, not a lackey of anyone, but rather a mediator at the request and acceptance of the parties in conflict in matters of human rights and democracy.
In Brazil, thousands of people have protested once again in Rio de Janeiro and several other cities against President Jair Bolsonaro's handling of the pandemic. Bolsonaro has long received criticism for downplaying the severity of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has claimed over 500,000 lives in Brazil. It is the second highest death toll in the world after the US. Demonstrators demanded Bolsonaro's impeachment and greater access to COVID-19 vaccines.
It is very important that all those who feel offended and oppressed by this government come to the streets, because we need to fight for the return of democracy.
Already have 1 million people dead in Brazil. This has to stop. Our genocide.
The National Election Jury of Peru has presented the credentials that certifies Pedro Castillo as president-elect of the country. The ceremony was held at the Grand National Theater of the Ministry of Culture. The event was attended by the current President of Parliament, Mirta Vázquez, and the head of the Judiciary, Elvia Barrios. The electoral body also delivered the credentials to the 130 congressmen who make up the new parliament during the period 2021-2026. The official takeover of Pedro Castillo will take place on July 28.
I call you to make a Peru for the bicentennial, a more committed, more human Peru. In this context, I must also tell you that I am here to fulfill this very important, very demanding role in the framework of governance, respecting institutionality, respecting this constitution, a constitution that must be left at the side of the Peruvian people, to be evaluated by Peruvians, to be felt by Peruvians, and to be determined by the people.
President Castillo also emphasized that he will build a model of government based on cultural diversity and will focus especially on the needs of the Peruvian people.
We are going to create the true Peruvian model, thinking about its diversity, thinking about its culture, thinking about the men and women of this homeland who need a change of truth. And the change we have to do starting with ourselves, starting at home, starting with the family, starting with the school, starting with the chakra. We can think of anything else, but take responsibility for the work this town does for us. And I have traveled it since young. I have traveled it being father, being teacher, being farmer, and want to transfer my experience as a teacher in this governmental scenario.
In Haiti, the state funeral of assassinated President Jovenel Moïse was held at his private residence amid heavy security. Foreign diplomats and Haitian politicians attended the funeral as the country continues to suffer protests and instability. The flag-covered coffin of the president was brought onto a central stage lined with white curtains carried by men in military uniforms. A line of Moïse supporters stood by the entrance shouting "Justice for Jovenel." Moïse's widow, who was seriously wounded in the attack that killed her husband, gave a speech as part of the tributes.
On behalf of the entire presidential family, I would like to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here to pay a final tribute to my husband, Jovenel Moïse. These are dark days for the family.
At least 7 of the Colombian mercenaries involved in the killing of Haitian President Jovenel Moïse had received military training in the United States, according to statements by the U.S. Secretary of Defense and an extensive report published by the Washington Post.
Producto de exportación con alta solicitud, an export product in high demand, which is essentially those thousands of Colombian soldiers, officers, etc., who over the last 20 years, specifically after Plan Colombia was implemented and Plan Patriota, which was Uribe's continuation of Plan Colombia, a hyper-militarization of the country, a doubling of the size of the military. You know, we're talking about thousands of soldiers who've been going around the world, to the United Arab Emirates, to Afghanistan, to Iraq. These are highly trained, highly disciplined soldiers.
Cuban Foreign Minister Pedro Rodriguez urged the United States government to halt a fleet planning to approach Cuba's territorial waters. The Cuban diplomat warned about the U.S. government plans led by political organizations based in Florida, which he described as provocative. In his latest statements, Rodriguez rejected the recent sanctions imposed by Washington against Cuban officials under the excuse of alleged abuses against demonstrators after the disturbances of July 11. China has called for the United States to lift sanctions against officials of the Cuban Interior Ministry and Revolutionary Armed Forces. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Xiao Lijian stressed that the U.S. should first examine its own human rights record instead of meddling in other countries' internal affairs and imposing sanctions. He also affirmed China's support for the Cuban government and its people amid the U.S. blockade. The latest U.S. aggressions come following the disturbances of July 11, which were promoted by political sectors in the U.S. with the financial support of the Biden administration. Russia has dispatched nearly 100 tons of humanitarian aid to Cuba. 2 cargo planes carrying more than 88 tons of humanitarian support took off from a military airport near Moscow, a statement said. The shipment included food, personal protective equipment, and more than 1 million medical masks. The delivery has been ordered by President Vladimir Putin. More news in a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back. Landslides and monsoon flooding had killed over 100 people in western India. A government spokesperson, Saida Wairanin, said over 100,000 people were rescued from nearly 900 affected villages across the state of Maharashtra, where many of those rescued were stranded on rooftops and even on top of buses and highways. Authorities have deployed hundreds of rescuers in the affected area to trace missing people and to take stranded to safety and even scores of soldiers are also helping in the rescue efforts. Typhoon In-Fa has swept into eastern China after flooding chaos. According to meteorological reports, Typhoon In-Fa made landfall in the city of Zhongshuo at 12:30 local time. The effects of the storm were also felt Sunday in Shanghai, China's largest city, with strong winds and steady rainfall. As a result, transport links have been suspended and people have been told to stay indoors. There has also flooding and dozens of ships have been evacuated from a busy port south of Shanghai. However, there are no reports of major damages. Belgium has been devastated by flooding for the second time in just over a week. The deadly floods killed 37 people. The southern Belgian town of Dinant was hit by the heaviest floods in decades after 2-hour strong thunderstorm turned streets into torrential streams that washed away cars and pavements but did not kill anyone. Still, the violence of this storm surprised many. Last week, more than 210 people died in the floods in Western Europe, with most of the casualties in Belgium and Germany.
We've already had a flood like that. I think it was in 1976 in Belgium, but it was just passing through. It wasn't as strong as this. Now we realize that floods, at least in our area, are more and more frequent and more dangerous. But we really need, and I really ask our Belgian government to send specialists to guide us towards what we should do for the population, because this must never happen again.
Croatian authorities have dragged a bus from a side of the highway that crashed early Sunday, killing 10 people and injuring at least 45 others. The incident happened at around 6 a.m. near the town of Slavonski Brod on the highway between the capital Zagreb and the Serbian border. Rescuers continue working around the bus while traffic on the highway was halted. The bus had Kosovo license plates and was on the regular road from Germany to Kosovo capital Pristina. Authorities said after an investigation that the driver of the bus had been arrested after he apparently lost control over the vehicle after briefly falling asleep.
There was 67 passengers and 2 crew members on board. Unfortunately, 10 people were killed, 9 passengers and 1 driver. We express our condolences to their families. 44 people have been admitted to General Hospital in Slavonski Brod. 8 of those 44 have sustained severe injuries. According to my information, 4 of those have undergone surgeries, and others are being monitored. Some have lighter injuries, some more serious. 14 other passengers and 1 driver are inside our police station here, and they are awaiting hotel settlement, which will be provided by the canton of Slavonski Brod.
French protesters opposed to COVID-19 health restrictions have clashed with police in Paris. Incidents started between the police and demonstrators during a rally against COVID-19 vaccination and government measures for certain professions. The French anti-riot police tried to push back the demonstrators with tear gas. This weekend, French lawmakers are due to vote on a bill drafted by the government aimed at setting up a health pass and mandatory vaccination for health workers. And also in Greece, police have used rubber bullets and tear gas against protesters in Athens as demonstrators rejected the government decision ordering the mandatory vaccination of health workers and nursing home staff. In Italy, hundreds of people had rallied in the center of Rome to protest against the introduction of a mandatory COVID-19 Green Pass. Some protesters say they were vaccinated but were against being obligated to have their children vaccinated. Also, they reject new freedom restrictions. The COVID-19 Green Pass is a certificate that contains a proof of vaccination or immunity. It will be mandatory from August 6 for indoor dining in restaurants and for access to cultural and sporting venues.
The Green Pass is an unjust obligation. Freedom can be restricted. It is against the Constitution. But there is a decree that imposing the Green Pass. It will be judged by the Constitutional Court that maybe will abolish in the next months. It is anti-constitutional.
Thousands of people have gathered in the annual Budapest Pride March to oppose the country's referendum on a controversial anti-LGBTQ law. Hungary's right-wing Prime Minister Viktor Orban has said that a national vote will be held to evaluate domestic support for the law, which includes a ban on the depiction or promotion of homosexuality. The march came after a controversial law passed by Hungary's parliament in June prohibited the display of content to minors that depicts homosexuality or gender change. The controversial law also limits teaching about homosexuality and transgender issues in schools.
This week, Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister, has announced a referendum on child protection, and the questions of the referendum are very transphobic and homophobic, so that's why there is a huge outrage in the Hungarian society. Many people are angry and would like to show their support for the LGBTQ community, so that's why we think that this Pride March will be historical, probably the biggest Pride March in Hungary ever. We think that this will be a very peaceful march, even more protected than in general by the police, because there is a huge foreign delegation here, not only ambassador, but there are many foreign journalists and politicians, even member of the European Parliament, so this will be a very, very bad point for Viktor Orban if there was any attack at the Pride.
Meanwhile, in Germany, nearly 35,000 people have peacefully marched for LGBTQ rights in the Christopher Street Day Parade, the equivalent of the Pride March. The demonstrators march while remembering what's happening in Hungary and other European countries.
What happens in Hungary, what happens in Poland, what happens in Europe in general also has an impact on Germany, on France, on all the other countries. What started in Poland with the LGBT free zones, what's happening in Hungary now, this reinforces all the hatred towards us. You see it has an impact in France, in the UK, in Spain.
After Corona, I find it really nice that this was possible, although with distance rules and with masks, but somehow to come together again is really nice.
Energy and environment ministers from the G20 group have failed to agree on a climate change accord. The G20 meeting was seen as a decisive step forward on the UN climate talks set to take place in Glasgow, Scotland. The failure to reach a common agreement ahead of this summit is seen as a setback to hopes of securing a meaningful accord in Scotland. One of the sticking points was phasing out coal power, which most countries wanted to achieve by 2025, but some argue will be impossible for them.
The only two topics we didn't agree, and I'm saying this because it's better to be clear, are points that also a person who is not doing this job understands. For a country with that kind of economy and 1.5 billion of citizens in this moment, it is very difficult to accelerate. It is not a coincidence that the countries that are opposing an acceleration are very big countries.
And we have more stories coming up after one last break, so stay tuned. Welcome back. At least 6 Cameroonian soldiers had been killed in Boko Haram attack in the north of the country. Military and local sources said Boko Haram militants overrun an army base, killing at least 6 soldiers and wounding several others. One of the soldiers said the militants arrived in a convoy of 6 vehicles. After several hours of fighting, the commander of the military base was killed alongside at least 5 of his colleagues. Casualties on the part of the militants remain unknown. Boko Haram has plagued Cameroon's far north region since 2014, killing more than 2,000 people, according to security reports. Hundreds of Pakistanis have protested against violence towards women. The protesters have rallied in Lahore to condemn violence against women after the daughter of an Afghan ambassador in Pakistan was brutally kidnapped. Afghanistan's foreign ministry have recalled its envoy and other senior diplomats from Islamabad back to Kabul. While few details have been released about the incident, Afghanistan's foreign ministry has said the minister's daughter was abducted for several hours by unknown individuals and was severely tortured.
And I'm here in support of all my sisters all of us are going through this epidemic of misogyny and patriarchy. And I think no matter who you are, whether you're someone who's a housewife or someone who works outside the house, whatever field you're in, women in Pakistan and around the world, we always have to deal with extreme violence and misogyny in all forms. But obviously, we can't change everyone's mentality in a day. But I think if we don't speak out, if we don't do anything, then even the little change that we are able to make by coming out, even that will not happen.
At least 146 Palestinians were injured by Israeli occupation troops who violently repressed a protest in the West Bank village of Betia. Occupation forces used tear gas, rubber bullets, and live ammunition against Palestinians who marched near the outpost of Ebiatar, taken from locals by the occupying Zionist regime in May, and where another illegal Israeli settlement is being established, in clear defiance of international law. Works are ongoing to restore Russia's famous Trans Siberian railway service, which has been defective since a bridge collapsed under heavy rain in southern Siberia. No injuries were reported from the collapse. However, dozens of trains are obstructed on the railroad lane that spans 10,000 kilometers through 8 time zones covering Russia west to east. President Vladimir Putin announced that authorities will have a section of the system functioning again in the next couple of days, while full operations are expected to resume in less than a week.
Ask the government to deal with it in the most serious way. Life necessities must be provided, including food and everything necessary for enterprises, operation and city services. Minister of Emergency Services and the head of the Russian railways have just reported that the first line is due to be repaired in 2 or 2.5 days, the second one in 5 days.
Japanese media have reported that COVID-19 cases have spiked to 127 among Tokyo 2020 athletes and personnel. The Tokyo 2020 organizing committee confirmed 17 additional cases at a press conference, including a foreign athlete who was staying in the Olympic Village. The latest 4 cases are likely to be security staff members at the Olympic venues. The committee has asked the athletes to undergo COVID-19 tests every day. However, the organizers admitted that daily testing failed to cover every athlete due to insufficient testing tools. And we come to the end of this news brief, but remember you can find this and many other stories in our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Jose Daniel Lopez. Thank you for watching.